Good morning. Good morning. Yeah, it works. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the warm applause. But I would like to ask for an even more warm welcome to Ed Gerstner, our China expert of this morning. Ed is from Springer Nature and knows everything about China. You've been working there. What is it?
As much as I can. 6 years.
6 years. Wow. So you'll hear a lot about China this morning, and the title of our session is Good Morning China. And I was wondering, could you do the Robin Williams?
Good morning, China!
Well, there we are. But at the same time, isn't it a little ironic that we're saying good morning China now? Because China is probably already up for 7 or 8 hours.
That was one of the best things about working in China, was the fact that you got a whole day's head start before all the emails came flooding in from my colleagues in London and Berlin and Heidelberg.
But it's also maybe symbolic for the way China works. You know, while we are still asleep, we might not even notice what kind of head start China is taking on us.
Absolutely, I think that's true.
Okay. Well, this session comes very timely in the sense that The Economist had a special issue report on China saying Red Moon Rising, will China dominate science? So I'd love to hear some comments from you on that, because the first science news we got this year, 2019, was of course landing on the dark side of the moon. Are you also from the Pink Floyd era?
Of course I am.
Yes, I thought that was showing. And maybe we could even, to take that whole symbolic approach a bit further, there are more landings on the moon planned for this year, but they all take place on the side of the moon that we can see, whereas China does its landing on the part of the moon that we cannot see. And what will they be doing there? What do you think?
Well, I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff that they could be doing, and it's a valuable scientific enterprise. There's so much more that we can learn about the moon and the early solar system and da-da-da-da-da-da. But what it really means is that they really have arrived. You know, the great ideological battles of the Cold War, the moon was central in those battles, and the race wasn't for any material gain. It was to say we are a power, we are an intellectual power, a technological power, and power in every other way. And I think it's a way of really, and I think that's a good thing, because anytime that a government uses science to try and build the national spirit, I think that's a good thing. There are worse things that China could be doing to build a sense of national pride.
Mm-hmm. And they're investing in many other big science projects. I found a little list in this Economist. Spacecraft is one. Drilling Antarctica is another one. Do you know more?
So they've got a limited number, but still quite wide-ranging group of the most important projects. One of which is sea exploration, the China Brain Project. Now, the China Brain Project is a bit of a sore point for me, because they keep on telling us we wanted to know more and more, because there's a European brain project and there's a US brain project, and we wanted to know what China was going to do, and they kept on saying an announcement will happen in the next few months, and they've been saying that for the last 4 years. So, and I still haven't heard anything about that. But there's a lot. In the meantime, they've invested a lot in neuroscience, both in terms of curing neurological diseases, but also in terms of AI. And so the really big thing, the thing that is of national strategic importance, is their investments in AI. But what I'm really pleased about is that they're also investing in things that are not of inherent direct strategic importance, like the search for dark matter or particle physics. Gene sequence, I think there's a strategic benefit there. But one of the things that I'm always worried about when you see great increases in investment, and then eventually there will be an economic reality biting in, and funds will start to become in more short supply. And then what do you prioritize? How do you spend money wisely when things are in short supply? And often the things that get targeted are things that are seen to have no material value, like particle science. But if we
aren't they building a large accelerator 3 times as big as CERN now has?
I believe that's under construction, but that could, that's going to be a very long-term project, and there has been some dissent within the Chinese scientific community as to whether or not it's a worthwhile endeavor. And when I talk about, I'm a physicist by long-distance training. The point that I always make when people question the value of particle science is that it gave us the web. If particle science if particle physics, high-energy particle physics could have extracted a royalty on the web, they wouldn't need to be asking anyone else for funding. But it's these sort of, what I call it is a concept that I've been sort of mulling about in my head. Scientific Keynesianism is that if you want to find new technologies, new solutions to problems you don't even know that you had, is you invest a lot of money in a really difficult problem, like finding the Higgs boson. You invest a lot of money in it doesn't matter what the problem is. It doesn't have to be curing cancer. It doesn't have to be eternal life. It can be as irrelevant to the daily lives of people as finding the Higgs boson. Now, I think there's poetry in there as well, and I think poetry should have a role in people's lives as well. But if you invest a lot of money in something that's really, really difficult, you will find solutions to other things. And I think the web is a classic example of that.
Let's take that example of the web, because CERN gave us the web. Tim Berners-Lee gave it for free, is also guarding very closely that these things remain free and open. One of the questions in this issue of The Economist is science in China as free and as open and with as lot academic freedom as we're used to, as we have it here?
That's a really interesting question, and the degree of, so when I was in China, I never experienced instances within the natural sciences. Now, the labs I was visiting were in biology, and they were in physics, and they were in engineering, and they were in material science. I never experienced any sense of concerns about restrictions on what they could say or couldn't say, or what they could research or what they couldn't research. And in fact, the first time that I visited China in 2011, one of the things that struck me most was how freely people were able to talk. Now, that's not to say that there is obviously unfettered dissemination of any idea or any thought. There are restrictions on what can be disseminated, but that's different from what can be thought. And I think it's important to understand that the Chinese model of communism is very different to, say, a Soviet model of communism. And I think, and understanding that is subtle and difficult, and often not straightforward.
But isn't it far more top-down than what we're used here?
Oh gosh, no. No. There are systems in place that will look for things, but there's a phrase in China that says, the mountains are high and the emperor is very far away. So a lot can go on. It's a big place with lots and lots of people. Lots goes on, and it's difficult to stop what people are thinking. It's not very top down. It's more often it's reactive than proactive. That's certainly true. There's very little proactive. When one thing that, and actually, I think it's an important thing to understand about how policy is made in China. It's very much that the top makes a declaration of willing, we hold these truths to be self-evident, or we would like to go in this direction, it's then for everyone else to work out what that means. No, I don't mean what that means in terms of what are they trying to say. It's like, how do we apply it in practice? And that happens in very different ways, in very different aspects.
And yet we had that little example, I would nearly said issue here yesterday, about a China representative saying in the open access discussion, if they tell us that we should do it this way, we all do it.
They never say you should do it this way. That's the thing, is they never say that, and I think that's a very good example. And actually, and I think that was Zhang Shaolin. Zhang Shaolin's a good friend of mine, and for the majority of my time, for at least 4 or 5 years since I was in China, I've been trying to support Zhang Shaolin's advocacy of greater openness, of open science, of open access, of open data, of all of these things. He and I have worked a lot close together to try and get that message out of the importance of openness for science and of the benefits of open access to papers.
Okay. Now that the word open access is here, yesterday there was a lot of discussion about China, and especially about the question, are they fully on board on open access or are they not? Robert Jan Smits made us believe that they are, and that would immediately raise the percentage of open access articles substantially. What do you hear in China, and what does your friend really say?
I mean, he says he is a staunch advocate of OA and says we are working towards greater openness in terms of access to scientific research. I like apple pie. Doesn't mean I'm going to make everyone an apple pie. And so that sense of willing. Actually, a better quote would be one from Deng Xiaoping, which is, it doesn't matter whether it's a white cat or a black cat, if it catches mice, it's a good cat. Now, at the root of what China wants out of this is impact. If they can get impact in a world of subscriptions, then they're fine with that. And that's the impression that you will get if you go to China, is that they just want the impact. They want people to know about their science. They want their science to make an impact in the world, both intellectually and materially. If they can get it through subscription, that's fine. There is a realization that they will increase their impact through greater openness, through more sharing. But it will be openness with Chinese characteristics.
What are these Chinese characteristics?
Well, I mean, they are keen to make sure that they get the best benefit out of things such as human genetics research. And so there are restrictions, there are procedures you have to go through. You have to ask for permission. If you're going to share a human genome that has been sourced from China, you have to ask permission for that. If you've got a cell line that has been sourced from China, if you want to share that cell line outside of China, even in Hong Kong, you have to ask permission for that. That is different, I think, from the practice that we might expect, but it's from an understanding that, well, the Chinese human genetic resource is Chinese, and the Chinese people deserve to be in control of that. And so there are little things like that, big things also, but it won't be. And I think it's important to realize that China is never going to become like Germany or England or the US, and vice versa. And so in a lot of this talk about competition and all these sorts of things, it's important that we can all maintain our own national identities and our own beliefs in what we hold to be important and valuable. And it will differ from Germany to the US to the UK to China.
I guess that's true, but it brings us to the more philosophical question whether science has sort of universal values that always have to be adhered to worldwide. Mm-hmm. So what kind of open access apple pie will we really get? What do you think?
Well, I mean, the thing is, they have always been supportive of green open access. They've all been very supportive of green open access. There is, I don't know a single Chinese researcher who doesn't want to publish in Nature and hasn't wanted to publish in Nature. Their institutions want them to publish in Nature and Science. The NSFC wants them to publish in Nature and Science. The government wants them to publish in Nature and Science. And they also want that information available. They can do so through green, the green route. What I think is interesting is that they are typically, and this might be surprising, is they tend not to mandate things like that. And it will be interesting to see, someday they might mandate that. I don't see that coming very soon. So in terms of the support that Zhang Xiaolin mentioned, coming from the highest levels, there have been statements coming out of the Central Committee that is robustly in support of greater sharing of data, and then it says, with some exceptions. But I think there will be limited exceptions, and support for open access. And we've heard, I regularly go around China quoting the Premier Li Keqiang as being supportive of open access as the way to go. And this is from a quote from 2014. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to mandate gold open access. That doesn't necessarily, I think it's unlikely that it means that they will mandate against hybrids. Mm-hmm. Many of their best journals, which Xi Jinping has specifically pointed out as these are examples of the best journals in the world, are hybrid journals. And I haven't heard any, which we run, not just us, but I haven't heard any requests for us to flip that to a purely open access journal, and I would be surprised if we did. Okay. But they do want it to be more open, but it will be in a much more gradual, and the other thing is, they very much look to what's happening elsewhere, and so they're interested in what's happening in Europe, but they're also interested in what's not happening in the US.
So can I summarize it as open in a Chinese way?
Yes.
Okay. Let's look a bit more into science publishing from China. Since 2016, they're publishing more articles than the US. What I hear from almost every publisher here in the room is that it's very hard to find peer reviewers in China. So they put a large burden on all the peer review elsewhere in the world, but don't seem to contribute their share in it. What's your view?
Well, it's certainly not about willing. The number of times that I've been asked, how do I become a peer reviewer for Nature, from Chinese researchers, they are eager because it's a token of respect. And it's being part of that conversation. They want to have impact. They want to be part of that conversation. One of the challenges is the fact that they all have the same name. I get a bigger laugh in China when I say that, because they know it to be true. Now, the ORCID database, last time I looked, so the ORCID database has researchers from around the world. The number one name in the ORCID database is Wang Wei. And I think there are something like... Yeah, is there a Wang Wei in the room? I would be surprised if this were a Chinese audience, I would be surprised if there weren't a Wang Wei in the room. There are 300 people called Wang Wei in the ORCID database. And the ORCID database has about 10% of the world's popular scientists. So that means there are 3,000 Wang Weis. Not Wang Weis, not car mechanics and hairdressers, Wang Weis who are doing scientific research, who are active scientific researchers. There are at least 3 Wang Weis at Tsinghua University. So if I'm an editor looking to enlist Chinese referees, and I find a paper that's relevant to the paper I want to review, and I think, ooh, this chap Wang Wei, he's at Tsinghua University, and then you go search the internet and you go, which Wang? And that's a real problem. But that is something that I think ORCID can solve. The other thing is, and I think it was mentioned yesterday, no, actually it was mentioned the day before yesterday, about IT infrastructure, is that IT infrastructure at Chinese universities is appalling. So many of them use Gmail addresses, 123 email addresses, a whole bunch of different email addresses. But more importantly, it means that their websites are not up to date. If they're in English, they're years and years old. And if they're in Chinese, they're still usually out of date. I think if we can convince all researchers everywhere, but in particular in China, to sign up to ORCID, then that becomes their website. It's completely and totally up to date, and it also gives us a reassurance of which one way it is that we want to review this paper. And so that's another thing that I've been advocating in China, is for them to use these systems that assure identity and background. But the thing is, it's not through lack of willing. I think it would help if they could get more training, and we're looking into building online and many others online platforms for helping improve the quality of peer review. Just teaching the emerging researchers from China. It's not from willing, but they're difficult to find, and so there's a long way to go.
Okay, we want all what was it again?
One
ways to enter into ORCID, and I think the ORCID database might need a representative in China to get all the Chinese scientists in there. Another issue that concerns some of our publishers who are active in China: censorship.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a fun topic. Again, this is where I was talking about openness with Chinese characteristics. It's a tough one to crack. And what I was saying before about ensuring, now we can't force them to take our content. That's the thing, is we can't force them to take our content. And I think the subscription model presents particular challenges in that context. If, for instance, someone were to publish a journal that contained content that was sensitive in China, if it's a subscription journal, then they just need to, and they would be able to tell all the libraries, don't subscribe to that journal. And that's a legitimate thing to not do. There's the Great Firewall, but that's a different issue. And so one of the things that I think, now I've met with lots and lots of other people on this topic to try and find what is the ideal solution. There is no ideal solution. But I think the best, personally, I've got to say, this is not necessarily a company line. Personally, I think, and I would say that because, well, for the last 6 years, I've been the chief advocate for open access in China, both in title and in Indeed. Personally, I think open access is a way around this challenge, because if you publish a paper open access, you can distribute it in many different forms. It doesn't have to be on a publisher's website. It can be in a repository. It can be distributed in many different ways. Now, that causes challenges as well. For instance, if you want to correct or retract a paper, if it doesn't exist in a central location, how do you fix all the bits that are out there? And so that's a challenge as well. But that's separate from that whole issue. But the more openness, and that's one thing that I'm quite pleased when the highest forms of government express support for openness. That's great, because this more openness will enable the freer and more fluid exchange of all sorts of ideas. All sorts of ideas. And as much as you might want to try to staunch the flow of certain ideas, that's more difficult to do in an open access world.
Okay. So you genuinely think that China will want to share?
Yes.
Their science. Oh, that's a good point.
Well, I mean, they certainly want to share it within there. So when I talked about AI, one of the things that I've been pushing for, and they've finally realized, is that the more they share data, the more fuel they have for their AI engines. And so they mostly want to, and in the first instance, they want to make sure that they share it internally. But it's such a big country, it's going to be difficult to only share it internally. So they've just opened it up to everyone. So they're very much, there's technological issues, but the principle is there.
Okay, that's a very interesting view. We have a bit of time left, but we have to be careful. Any questions from the audience? Yeah, please, Fred.
Ed, I have a question given your vast experience here. The last time I had an extensive tour of Chinese scientific institutes was 2010. And one of the things I was impressed with, I knew the first and second directors of the Chinese National Science Foundation, the head of CAST, head of several CAST institutes, and they were all what we would call in the West sea turtles. They had extensive education, graduate school or postdocs in a Western institution. And I think that has really helped the openness, the communication, how they're building science. Is that still true? Is the power structure filled with sea turtles?
Yes, it still is. I think that will change. I think it's right that will change. So the things like the 1,000 talents and 100. There are a whole bunch of programs that the Chinese institutions have used to try and lure back the diaspora. They recognized that some of their greatest minds had left in the previous few decades, and they wanted to bring them back. And one of the consequences of that is that you weren't just bringing back their expertise, but you were also bringing back their philosophies of curiosity and exploration and rigor and all these good things, and injecting them back into Chinese academic life. Now, that academy is gigantic, but they do tend to, the haigui, the sea turtles, do tend to be at the upper echelons. That's changing, so there will be more and more homegrown talent. Now, there's in China, the challenge is that, and I experienced this myself in Australia, is there's this thing called cultural cringe. And it's that if it comes from here, it mustn't be very good. And so in Australia, if you want a job, if you want tenure in Australia, you have to have gone overseas. Because if you were trained in Australia, obviously you're not very good. The same is true in China. So the best and brightest, when they graduate from Beida, from Peking University or Tsinghua or wherever, the first thing they do is leave. And so you have a real dearth of postdocs. And postdocs are the engine of research. All the best postdocs go to the US because they can't get tenure if they do their postdocs in China. That's a real challenge, and that's the flip side of that. But the benefit is that you are injecting a really good intellectual, academic ethic and philosophy into Chinese society, and I think that has been really the engine of innovation in Chinese science, and will continue to be.
And they'll probably also bring those values home, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I read in The Economist they call that program 1,000 talents.
That's right.
Yeah, very nice. Okay, we're up in time. I hope we've woken you up concerning China. At least I feel a bit more energy in the room. So to conclude, we've had The Dark Side of the Moon. What are the next Pink Floyd songs we can expect from China?
Another brick in the firewall.
Thank you, Ed.